Welcome to the fifth season podcast, Conversations on Successful Aging. I'm David Lowry, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Don Drew. We both believe that aging is a privilege, and we want to have honest conversations on how to do it well. Hey, Don.
Hello, David. It's great to be back with you for what is the culmination of a four-part series on engaging our deeper interior lives.
That's right. Over the last 3 episodes, we've been building a foundation together. We started in our first week by introducing the Dream Lab, which gives us a practical framework for listening to our interior lives through night dreams and waking moments. And then in the second episode, we confronted the internal resistance that naturally pops up when you slow down. And we unpacked 3 specific demands: humility, patience, and courage, which are required to show up and stay in a daily contemplative practice.
Last week, we focused on building a bridge from all that inner information to an outer awareness and presence, moving from our ego's desire for advice giving and visibility toward a life lived with integrity, consistency, and genuine compassion.
And this brings us to the largest question of all that we want to talk about today. What is all of this work actually for as we learn to be deeply human in a world that's constantly accelerating away from depth? And today we're going to recast all of this into a thing I call living a 0-point life.
David, that phrase you use, 0-point life, has a weightiness to it, right? But it also sounds beautifully audacious. When I read through our outline for today, the first thing that struck me was the imagery of a ledger, right? We spend our entire lives building up a spiritual, social, and professional credit score. We pile on titles, roles, accomplishments, and a drive for legacy. A friend of mine once said all those letters after my name indicating a rank or academic title are really just about me trying to convince myself I am worthy. And that really resonated with me when she said that. But what does it mean to completely clear that board?
It's sort of scary, isn't it, when you think about all those things we work so hard for and then all of a sudden clearing the board in the 5th season of life. Because what it really means is that we're not going to hang on to all of that the way we once did. Instead, there's something even better. It's a state of what we might call pure being, lived in the present moment, where your worth is not based upon all those achievements you had or even future achievements. And by the way, it's not even going to be diminished by any regrets that you have. To define it exactly, the 0-point life is a radical realization that your spiritual, emotional, and existential balance sheet is already completely cleared, debt-free, and inherently whole.
So it's a stripping away of the ego's ledger, intentionally setting aside our socioeconomic status and academic titles and our long histories of trying to perform or produce, leaving only the beautiful reality of our present.
I like to think of it as this. It's setting aside all of those things that used to be so important to you, that gave you status and meaning, and coming to the realization that you don't really need that to make an impression on anybody. The only person you really need to improve and impress is yourself. And even then, you're still okay, even if you're not all that impressed with yourself, because to live at 0 means acknowledging this profound truth. There's nothing, absolutely nothing you can do to make the universe love you more, and nothing you can stop doing that would make the universe love you less.
As we navigate this latter part of our lives, what we call the 5th season, this concept takes on an urgency, right? Those who are truly awakening in this stage of life understand that meaning isn't found in the accumulation of possessions or power or religious merit or status.
I have a sister in a nursing home right now who suffers from dementia. And sometimes I ask, what is the meaning and purpose of her life? And the thing of it is, her meaning is no longer based on all those things she did once before, nor her present state. She has meaning just because she lives and because she's important, because she's a human being. So this 5th season is about surrendering all of what we might call scaffolding that you used to rely upon, like a degree or a master's or an MBA or a JD, or just having all the right certificates that people demanded of you. And instead, when you return to 0, you cease trying to bargain with yourself or with others or the universe, and you stop trying to manipulate others about how worthy you are, and you stop seeking status, stop giving that unsolicited advice, stop answering questions for people they didn't really ask you to, It's a totally different way of living.
What you're suggesting actually requires a pretty massive internal shift, right? As someone who has spent two careers, actually, one in academia and one as a strategist, I know all too well the tendency to demand certainty, to want everything precise, mapped out, and controlled. Living at zero asks us to step away from those demands, doesn't it?
We sometimes think that when we get older, we're supposed to be wiser. And if we are wiser, then we should just share it with everybody. Instead of demanding the certainty based off all the things you think you know over the years, you step directly into what we might call unknowing. You just finally say, you know what, this is a crazy world. And what happened in my life probably isn't going to work today. Don and I were talking about a course he once taught, and he said, man, if I had to teach that, it'd be all different today because everything's different, right? The 0 point is where you realize that you don't constantly have to always be constructing a bridge to somewhere, whether it's a sacred bridge or some sort of bridge of importance. You're already worthy. The ground you're standing on is already worthy and sacred, and the universe loves you unconditionally, despite what you may have been taught or heard along the way. And if you can really accept that and let that other stuff go, some really remarkable things can happen.
Our journey fundamentally shifts from trying to become something to simply awakening to what already is, realizing we are a person who is unconditionally loved by the universe exactly as we are right now. Okay, so let's take a deeper look at why this is so difficult for us, because there is an exhaustion that comes from living life as an audition, right? Like you said, most of us were handed a ledger at a very young age. We were taught implicitly or explicitly that our presence on this planet had to be continuously justified by what we achieved.
Yes, Don. And we've talked on this program about ageism. And if you really get down to it, ageism is where people say we're not worthy because we're too old or something like that. And then on the flip side of it, it's us believing that, well, maybe I'm not as good as I used to be. Maybe I've gotten behind. I haven't studied all these things. I don't know how to use AI like other people. And you could just keep spinning yourself up about how unworthy you've become over the years because you've gotten behind the curve. But if you really, really think about it, if we just genuinely look at ourselves, we don't have to pray that we become, some sort of superhuman at this age of life. We don't need that. The universe isn't expecting that of us. Those are expectations that we've placed on ourselves. And sometimes we allow others to say those things about us and we accept it as true, but it's not.
It's not always about us and what's going on in our own minds, right? As you
Sure.
have pointed out, this ledger mentality isn't just an individual affliction. It's not just something that goes on our head. It's actually the core currency of our entire world structure. Look at our institutional religions, which were originally meant to point us towards a mystery. Too often they construct intricate moral codes and rigid dogmas, transforming the divine into a celestial accountant, tasked with determining who is saved and who is damned.
That's something that we really have to purge ourselves of. This idea that somebody is in charge of deciding who is worthy and who's not worthy and what that's going to mean both in this world and the next. And Don, if you think about it, our socioeconomic and political system does the same thing. They draw these arbitrary lines to discover who's going to be favored with money and resources and which groups are going to be cast aside. And honestly, culture looks at the human soul and says, if we can't figure it out economically, it doesn't have any power or social status, it doesn't count. So we begin to rank livelihoods based on whether or not somebody possesses some sort of worthiness, while others maybe just should be invisible.
Yeah, and even the sanctuary of home isn't immune from what we're talking about here. Well-meaning and loving parents, driven by their own unexamined anxieties, often impose a demand for obedience that has very little to do with safety or improving the child's life. And instead, it becomes rooted in fear, power, control, and punishment, unconsciously passing that heavy, exhausting ledger to another generation.
And we can all fall prey to that too, even in the fifth season. We can think, oh, our kids aren't living the way they ought to do. Or we see trouble ahead, or we think that they ought to live their lives a certain way. Don, everywhere we look, there is this us and them dynamic that's reigning supreme about us. We categorize, we rank, we separate, we judge. We've convinced ourselves that worth is a scarce commodity and that you absolutely have to have it if you're going to be worthy. But here we are in the fifth season, and we have a time and a place that's very unique and special to us. We don't have to go that way. We can instead choose a different direction. a truth that says that worth isn't what it's all about. Your worth is not a variable to be calculated. It's a fact. You have worth, and everybody else does too.
So let me give you some feedback here and make sure I'm understanding you correctly. To live a 0 point life is to awaken to the reality that before you ever drew your first breath, your account was already fully funded. It's not something that you had to do on your own. It's not your life goal. The universe does not keep a spiritual or social credit score. As you said, there's nothing you can do to make the sacred source of all things love you more, and nothing you can stop doing that would make it love you less. Your value is given freely, completely, and irrevocably.
Absolutely. When your children were born and when my children were born, they were already worthy. And here's the beautiful kicker. The moment you truly accept your worth as an absolute fact, you are forced to accept the worth of everyone else as a settled fact as well. How you feel toward them has nothing to do with their worth. How others feel towards you has nothing to do with your worth.
So what happens when we forget this, David? What happens when we or the institutions around us, which commonly happens, consistently act as though this cosmic fact doesn't really exist?
Life stops flowing. When we live as though worth has to be earned, we introduce this massive and I think unnatural friction into the universe. We become hyper reactive. If a colleague disagrees with us, we don't hear just a differing opinion. We feel a threat to our own security, and we lash out to defend our status.
And if a loved one fails to meet our expectations, we can weaponize our disappointment, holding them in an emotional debt, so to speak. If we fall short of our own ideals, we can drown in a sea of guilt, constantly apologizing to a universe that isn't even angry.
Sure, and some people are living their lives in ways that we don't like or approve, and it never occurs to us that that doesn't impact us in any way at all. If people want to live differently than us, it doesn't affect us in any way. And their worth, by the way, isn't determined by whether or not we approve of them or disapprove of them. And the other thing is that, we live in a world where a nation is rising up against other nations and neighbors against their neighbors. We live in a very divided society where people are terrified that other people are not doing the right things. And it's fracturing our world because the friction, the anxiety, the exhaustion, and the gridlock we experience every day are just simply consequences of swimming against this current of absolute grace where everybody's worthy.
Imagine the immense relief in entering a room, whether it's a university classroom or a therapy clinic or your living room, knowing that you have absolutely nothing to prove and nothing to protect. You don't need the systems of this world to validate you. The cosmos already has. You don't need the person across from you to approve of you to verify your existence. Isn't that a marvelous idea?
It's a marvelous idea. The other day, my wife and I were on a trip, and just outside the Walgreens was a young man asking for money. The old person might have said, "You look like you could go out and earn some money. What are you doing sitting here? You look healthy." But, what I think doesn't change the fact that this person is still a worthy individual. And if I give that person money, that doesn't mean I am worthy or not worthy. My worthiness is already an established fact, whether I give the person money or not. So for both of us, the beggar and the person being asked for money, we're all worthy. You finally silence all of this chatter inside of yourself. You're free to do the only thing that matters, which I believe is to show unconditional love and deep compassion to everyone that you can, for as long as you can. If you let the ledger be erased, the system of judgment has no longer any power over you or them because it's a zero balance.
David, this brings us to a concept that is deeply embedded in everything we've been talking about over this whole series, the art of unlearning, or what you call the path of subtraction. We live in a culture entirely obsessed with accumulation. From the moment we enter school, we are taught that growth is a matter of adding more data, more degrees, more techniques, more strategies. We treat the mind like a vessel that must be filled to the brim to be considered useful. That's problematic in some ways, isn't it?
When we step into the fifth season, there's a countercultural truth that we ought to embrace, and that is the highest form of spiritual and psychological maturity is not accumulation, but just the opposite, subtraction. Wisdom isn't found in what we learn, but what we have the courage to unlearn.
Our listeners have heard me mention several times now, I'm sure over the last couple of years, that in your office you have a sign behind your head that they can often see if they're watching the video that says, "I am still learning." And for you to say that how important unlearning is really something.
Well, and I feel so busted, Don, because the wall does say, I am still learning. It's a phrase of Michelangelo, but maybe I ought to put a little carrot above it and say, I am still unlearning as well at the fifth season of life, right? Because if we're going to go into the 0 point, we've got to do that. Don, there's 5 specific things or lessons that we have to systematically unlearn, and I wanted to include them in our program today. Why don't you take the first couple of them?
First, we must unlearn the lie of conditional belonging. From childhood, we are taught the transactional rule of the ledger. If you perform well, you are included. If you fail, you are cast out. We carry this directly into our relationship with the divine and the universe, believing we are always just one mistake away from exile. We must unlearn this entirely and realize our belonging in this cosmos is an absolute, unshakable reality that cannot be altered by our behavior. Then the second one is we must unlearn the equation of identity equals utility. Identity equals utility. We live in a world that asks, what do you do? Before it ever asks you your name. How many times has that happened to you, David, right? You're meeting new people and so forth, and they want to know, well, what do you do? Is one of the first questions we tend to ask each other. We are conditioned to believe that our value is directly tied to our productivity or our academic output or our titles or our capacity to fix other people's problems. To enter 0, the professor, the therapist, and the provider must unlearn the idea that they only matter when they are being useful. You matter simply because you are.
That is the statement we want to think about. You matter simply because you are. And the third lesson is we have to unlearn the weaponization of guilt as an important metric. We're always guilting people. We were raised to believe, to feel bad about our humanity. And sometimes deeply embedded in our religious training is the idea that being human is somehow not being holy, and that the more we wallowed in our guilt for our flaws and our doubts, our limitations and human failings, that meant we were being pious or making our way back to holiness. It's just a sickness. It's a sickness based in ledger thinking that says being alive and living a human life is a bad thing that has to be overcome. That the universe requires you to grovel in order to be worthy. It's not true. Guilt is not growth. It's just friction. And then I want to say something else that I think is a little bit controversial. You have to get rid of the illusion, the certainty of faith. There's so many people saying things about the Bible and philosophy and about political beliefs and about one thing or another. People just state it as though this is the ultimate truth. But religion and culture are not necessarily absolute milestones and markers of what's true and right. You have to learn to doubt some of the things you've been taught. Saying, I don't know, isn't a sign of weakness or bankruptcy. You have to learn to this fear of saying, I don't know the answer to that. One of the things that has become more and more distasteful to me is just listening to people lecture others as though they had the high road of morality and politics and everything else, when it's just so clear that's just not the truth.
I love these lessons, David. There's a fifth one that we want to cover as well, and it's about unlearning the us versus them binary. And this is one I think that is so prevalent today. Our political, social, and religious systems thrive on division. We are trained to look at the world through a lens of judgment, categorizing people into the righteous and smart and the foolish, the worthy and the unworthy. To live a flowing life, as you are suggesting, we must unlearn these artificial borders and completely dismantle the ledger that grades the souls of our neighbors.
It's like we go around thinking that we have the answer. We know who's good and who's not, and living wicked-like. But when you really get to know them, they're really great people. We have to unlearn these things, Don. You have to step away into what people call a cloud of unknowing, which is just to say, we really don't know, do we?
Yeah, it's precisely in that moment of unknowingness that the true transformation occurs, isn't it? When you have the courage to lay down these 5 burdens and unlearn them, you don't fall into an abyss. You land on a bedrock of absolute grace. You're finally free to listen deeply, authentically, and without defense to the human being sitting across from you and frankly to yourself for that matter.
I remember when I first started thinking this way, I would find myself objecting to myself like, yeah, but I know good and well that person is not any good. And I know that what I'm doing is way better than that person. But that is a ledger type of thinking, and it is holding us back.
David, let's bring this down to everyday spaces where our listeners live. What happens when we step into the space of zero within our daily routines? Think about the roles we play every single day. Maybe you're a teacher holding space for a classroom, or a caregiver tending to an aging loved one, or maybe even a professional managing a team, or a friend trying to mend a fractured heart. Let's talk about that part.
Well, the temptation of the ledger is so deeply ingrained in our culture, and frankly, in me too, right? It's always there. It's always saying, oh, that person, ooh, I don't know what I think about that person, or that person needs to get their act together. We've been conditioned to believe that we only matter when we're being useful. But what if it's a lie that we are finally allowed in the fifth season to unlearn? Wouldn't that be something?
The 0 point life demands a much deeper vulnerability from every single one of us, doesn't it? It invites us to step into any room, whether it be a corporate boardroom or a difficult family dinner or a conversation with a struggling friend, knowing we have absolutely nothing to prove and nothing to protect.
And that means that we basically have two very distinct gifts. One is when you take away certainty, the subtraction of certainty, you don't have to have a heavy burden of correcting everybody or having all of the answers. Instead, you can just say, honestly, don't know. I don't know. And allowing your relationships and life to become a shared space of potential discovery and mystery rather than some sort of script that you constantly have to control and write and manipulate in order to get people to do what you think they ought to be doing.
And the second of these gifts is what you have referred to, David, as the gift of pure presence. And I really like that. It means resisting the frantic urge to fix other people's problems, manipulate outcomes, or offer unasked advice. Instead, you choose the sacred stillness of simply being fully present for the person sitting across from you, trusting that your quiet, loving presence is more than enough. I've been asked before on many occasions, what is the right thing to say to somebody who's just had a big loss and is hurting? And I would say that in most cases, the best thing to do is say nothing, just be there.
Just be there. I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, listening to their concerns about their children and everything, and just reflecting back. It sounds like it's pretty hard these days, or just giving encouragement and saying, I think you're doing a really great job. I know this isn't easy. But resisting that urge to have the answers and resisting the urge to suggest that maybe they should try something that they haven't thought of or something like that. That's the gift of pure presence, just being there for them, stepping out from behind your titles or your accomplishment, and just give them the rarest gift that we have today. And that is, I hold you as a person who is perfect the way you are. You're not a problem to be solved. When you're with me, you're debt-free, and I know that you're loved by the universe.
As we draw a curtain on this episode, on this entire 4-part series for that matter, on unlocking our inner wisdom, we want to invite you, our friends and listeners, to join us in taking a long, deep breath.
If you can, just imagine that you're taking this deep breath, and then as you exhale, imagine that you're letting go of all that heavy scaffolding you built up over the years, just trying to prove to others how worthy you were and that you belonged in this world. That ledger's gone now. The account book has closed. You can walk away and you can know that you have a zero balance. You owe nobody anything anymore.
Let this truth settle into your soul today. There is absolutely nothing you can do to make the universe love you more, and nothing you can stop doing that would make the universe love you less.
Your worth isn't a grade to be earned or some variable that you have to calculate. It's just a cosmic fact. You don't have to build a bridge to the sacred because the very ground that you're standing on right now is sacred enough.
Hey, everybody, subscribe to the 5th season wherever you listen to your podcasts. We love it when you share these episodes with someone you think is ready to stop performing. Lay down their ledger and start transmitting from a place of true depth. Take care of yourselves, everyone, and remember, aging is a privilege. Let's do it well. See you next time.